Hi everyone, it's Simon Terry and welcome to Microsoft 365 May. I'm going to be talking today about Yammer as a strategic talent and capability coordination tool. I'd like to begin in what is Reconciliation Week in Australia, recognising the traditional custodians of the land on which this conference is hosted and the traditional custodians of the lands where our speakers and participants are located. We'd like to pay their respects to elders past, present and emerging. And we'd like to extend the same welcome and acknowledgement to our colleagues in New Zealand. This conference has a code of conduct. You can look up the code of conduct information at m365may.com/code of conduct. We just recommend everyone to make sure that this conference is something that's inclusive and supportive for all people. A little bit about me. For those of you who don't know, I'm the chairman of Change Agents Worldwide, which is a network of future work professionals who work together to help organisations adapt to new technologies and particularly to help organisations with the Microsoft 365 suite. One of the key things about today's talk is that I'm focused very much on the change and adoption story. And so in an effort to set your expectations, there is no code in this talk today. There will be very little discussion of features at all. What we're really going to focus on is the role Yammer can play in fulfilling organisational strategy and the role that we as change professionals need to play to assist our organisations to realise that value. So here's essentially the takeaway. If you take nothing else away from this talk, take away the idea that Yammer is not just a communication tool. Yammer has a lot more capability to help your organisation to realise its strategy. Most of us are very familiar with a great deal of confusion in the market around the role of Yammer, and at times that's driven by people focusing on Yammer as a communication tool only. If we focus just on the capability of talking to other people, then rightly what comes up are queries around, well, what's the role of Yammer versus Teams? What's the role of Yammer versus email? Why isn't it more effective to communicate with people in other ways, using other products and other solutions? The key thing here is to realise that the role Yammer plays in your organisation is about helping your organisation to achieve strategic goals by surfacing talent and capability that your organisation is not aware of. And that is a role that no other product in the Microsoft stack can play. The open discovery in Yammer, the ability to coordinate and collaborate, represents novel opportunities for your organisation. And I'll actually argue it's some of the highest value that your organisation needs to achieve its strategic outcomes. We often get confused in our organisations because there's so much focus on process, on compliance, and on consistency of delivery that we start to think our organisations are all about certainty. But if anything's been clear over the last 3 months of the COVID-19 experience, it's that we live in a world of great uncertainty. Our organisations exist to coordinate the talents and capabilities of our people and our organisations, and to navigate and adapt to the unknown and the uncertain. We're trying to match the capabilities of our organisation to uncertain customer demands, to uncertain needs and goals in the marketplace. And we're dealing with rapid change and constant shifts, none more evident than being trapped at home for a couple of months. And one of the key things that we need to understand is that even organisational strategy is not fixed. Strategy is iterative and always evolving. This strategy model, the playing to win model from Lafley and Martin, is one I use with a lot of my clients. And the reason I do so is it frames some really simple, clear questions that organizations can use to set their strategy and to understand what actions they need to take as they move forward. The key thing about the Lafley and Martin model is it recognizes that strategy isn't a straight line. It's a process of iteration. What you choose as your aspiration of influences where you choose to play, how you choose to win, what capabilities you need, and what management systems you need. But equally, those changes flow back up. And the whole way through this process, the organization is learning and discovering the most effective way to compete in the market. That process of iteration and evolution is one that keeps CEOs up at night. That's the process that really challenges them every day to understand, is their organization performing at its highest level? Are they getting the maximum value out of their people and their resources? What they don't know are these kinds of questions. Are employees even aware of the current settings of strategy? When I work with clients, it's quite obvious in many cases that the strategy that's discussed around the boardroom table is not known or understood or being executed at the front line. What's the point of a strategy that doesn't translate to frontline execution? The other thing is, are employees understanding how and influencing how strategy changes and evolves? Employees need to be aligned to the way strategy is and how it's developing, and employees need to keep adapting and contributing to that adaptation. One of the key things that successful organizations do is they let their employees lead and contribute to strategy and to execution. They're constantly refining the way their organization meets customer needs, delivers processes, and solves problems using the insights and the value that's created from their entire network of employees, not just the specialists in the strategy team, the whole organization. And when we map this against the kind of role Yammer can play in your organization, you can see as we move from aspiration down, Yammer plays an increasing role in your organization. Yammer helps organizations adapt and transform culture, bringing all the employees into a conversation about how we want to behave here to achieve and fulfill our purpose and our strategy. Yammer can play a critical role creating a two-way flow of conversation for employees around what strategy is and what their contributions can be to it. And importantly, as an open community, Yammer is a place where there can be rich reservoirs of knowledge, where information gathered in real time can flow directly to the people who need to know it, and people can pull on the resources of the organization to support the execution and to deliver the kinds of capabilities and management systems that are needed. So this is a really critical role for Yammer that, to be honest, isn't one that's well matched by products such as Teams. Teams is a fabulous tool for team collaboration and work, but it's generally based around closed teams. So this doesn't have that open discovery, that open interaction that's required for this kind of process and iteration involving the whole organization. So what we start to see, if we think about Yammer's roles in this context, this strategic context where strategy execution is continuously evolving to enable fitness to market, Yammer helps bring together all the people, all the capability, and all the resources of the organization and align them to execution of strategy. And that's critical because that's where you start to get, you know, the knowledges and the talents and the capabilities, not just the official ones, but the unofficial ones as well, being delivered through open communities and through a constantly evolving culture. If you're interested in entering the competition, there's your opportunity to do so. So many of you might be familiar with the model I've used for adoption in Yammer for over 5 years now. This is based on the work I've done in a number of organizations and has continued to evolve. This model has gone on to influence how, for example, Swoop Analytics measures and tracks the effectiveness of Yammer networks. And the model is really based around 4 stages that connect back to this theme of coordinating everyday work and the contribution of everyday employees into this strategic value creation. It begins with connection. You don't have a Yammer network unless you can connect and align people to the right goals, and people feel psychologically safe to contribute. The sharing phase is where Yammer networks really begin to take off and really accelerate their value creation. When people begin to work out loud in Yammer, what you're starting to see is the work of the organization is visible. People can discover the work of others. Things like duplication begin to disappear, and people start to see the opportunities for the next phase, which is around solving problems. And when people see Yammer as a place they can go to solve their problems in their everyday work, to solve the needs of customers who are raising challenges with broken processes, then you're starting to deliver directly to those strategic goals. So many organizations at a senior leadership level know their processes aren't perfectly aligned, but they don't know how to fix them. Being able to distribute authority to your employees through Yammer to identify problems, to raise issues, and to be able to communicate with the key experts in the organization around particular processes, particular products, particular issues, to address them and be able to move new solutions forward is a really key source of strategic value, and a key way that organizations leverage the capabilities of their employees to manage fitness in the marketplace. And obviously something that's so important in our digital age, moving at real pace, moving in global markets, is the ability to innovate, to scale individual agency, to scale the work of teams, and to take change to market. You might have a fabulous project team working incredibly effectively in teams to deliver a new product or to deliver a new process. But at some point, you need to take that change out to the market. It needs to be something that grows and evolves through other people and ultimately the whole organization. And then it begins to be executed in market, and you need to learn from that experience. As a famous Prussian general once said, no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. As we take our innovations to market, we suddenly discover a whole bunch of stuff. We do pilots, we want to learn, we want to evolve. And this process of sharing, solving, and innovating continues to iterate. It continues to inform our organization. It continues to grow the way we move and react in market. And Yammer underpins and supports these changes through small groups, through communities, through open sharing, and by the ability to pull and discover what you need to get your work done every day. So the critical questions I ask organizations are these questions. What communities does your strategy need to deliver in an environment of uncertainty? No matter how smart your board, no matter how much smart your CEO and your management, there are things you don't know. And the critical questions are, how do you bring people in who can help you to address these issues, to solve problems as they arise, and ultimately to help you manage that customer fitness? So the questions that I work with organizations around and really come down to that adoption approach are asking questions like, who do you need to connect to make sure your strategy is going to be effective in marketplace? Because that strategy around who you connect helps determine who you need on your Yammer network. It determines what groups you need. It determines what champions you need. It determines what culture and what environment you want to create on that network through that connection phase. You also need to think about what information you want to share. Most organizations have an elaborate employee communication strategy and know exactly what they want to tell their employees. The important thing about this question is it isn't just about what you want to tell employees, it's also what you want employees to tell each other. What information do you want employees to be sourcing from their roles and their marketplaces and their expertise and their past experiences, and you want them to be sharing that with the whole network? And that's that concept of working out loud that we spoke about before. Working out loud is just simply, sharing work in progress with a relevant community. And, we need to foster that in that stage. And understanding and being clear with the employees that they have the authority, they have the degrees of freedom to solve problems using the network in Yammer and using their colleagues is a really important thing. And authorizing them to make changes and to do things differently is how you start to realize these benefits and drive the strategy forward. One of the key things that a lot of people kind of say is, well, can you make it easy for us and just do a what to use when guide, so I know exactly what happens in Yammer and I know exactly what happens in Teams. But the key thing we all discover is that there are actually so many dimensions to this question of exit strategy. And there's so many different ways in which we want our organization to interact and to learn. If we just, we have different kinds of conversations. I talk a lot about the differences between chat, short sharing of information, fast-paced, really rapid. Context is known. You don't need to spend a lot of time in that environment. Can create massive confusion if context is not shared, because people will make assumptions and they'll be wrong. Conversations are where we dive deeper in and start to have a slower, deeper conversation, because what we're trying to do is build shared understanding. And as we move across, we're moving across into sharing of work. We're actually starting to combine different people's talents and capabilities. Now, I haven't put specific products on this chart because, you might say to me, well, Teams has a chat capability, so it's chat, right? But chat also happens in corridors, it happens in text messages, it happens in phone calls. There's lots of different ways we chat. There's lots of different and something like conversation collaboration can happen in both Teams and Yammer. But they happen in different ways because often products like Teams are fabulous where you've got a known audience. You know exactly who you want to be talking to. What Yammer enables you to do is have conversations and collaborations with ambiguous audiences. Maybe you just don't know who the person is who has the expertise. Maybe you don't know who the person is that can solve your problem. Importantly, you might want to engage in discovery, creation, or adaptation with anyone in your organization. And it might be independent of their role. I've seen many situations where the person who had the defining expertise to solve a problem in one of my clients actually was working potentially in a call center, but studying a university degree at the same time in an unrelated discipline and brought that expertise to bear to solve a problem. What you're doing there is discovering unique talents and capability of your people, and you're bringing that to bear on the problems and challenges that your organization has to solve in its strategy. So in this time of real uncertainty and change, here are some of the use cases that I've seen organizations leverage Yammer through, sudden onset of remote working, through, the changes in business processes to adapt to office closures, store openings, new rules for isolation and new safety. So giving people community, just in that fundamental area of connection, giving people a sense of community, a place to go in these times where people are isolated, working from home or working in new ways. Fostering communities of interest. I've seen more conversations about baking through the last 2 months in work communities than ever before. I'm used to the dog communities. The baking communities are new for isolation, and a red hot go for all your future adoption efforts. You know, companies are reiterating values and culture. When things are uncertain, give people the reassurance that the fundamentals of your organization have not changed. Enable people to be supported and to call for help. Critical things you can do. Status updates, obvious thing to use Yammer for. Sharing competitor actions. Different organizations respond to the same situation in very different ways. What can you learn from your competitors' actions, and how can you share that market intelligence with those who can use it? And importantly, when we're all sitting in different places, working out loud while working from home. Never more important to take your work product and make it transparent to those in your team, those in your organization, and others around you, so that they can learn from that work, contribute, and develop. You know, when we're separated, duplication is fostered quickly. Duplication's an obvious waste in an organization. Again, sourcing answers, borrowing skills and capabilities. Many organizations have had to furlough people or send them home or stand them down, and they're working with short staff. So you don't want someone who has relevant capabilities to be wasted. How can you find those people? How can you leverage them and bring them to the bear? And obviously, as you start to move into doing different, you know, tools like Yammer can support people to share their practices, share what's working, and clear blockages and barriers. One of the famous case studies that I didn't have anything to do with, it's a very public case study, but is a story from Telstra here in Australia, where you know, a previous CEO of Telstra put out on their Yammer network a call for all the policies and processes that were getting in people's way, and ended up with hundreds and hundreds of suggestions of things that could be done to improve the everyday organisational work for employees. I've done that in many of the organisations I've worked with in Yammer, and it always is a real power changer in terms of value creation. And it's a critical thing you can do in this time when things might be a little bit slower, to see how you can streamline things for the uplift that's to come. So, you know, how do we accelerate this learning, this adaptation and change as we want to move forward in this environment? We want to make sure that our strategy is working for us now, and that we're ready for the growth we're going to need ahead to recover from current uncertainties and from current restrictions in demand. So some key takeaways. Working out loud. For those of you who haven't understood working out loud, make sure you take the time to understand it and really to communicate the value of it in your organisation. Many employees think they're not allowed to share their work. They think the organisation has rules and policies and processes that prevent them from making their work available inside their organisation to their own colleagues. Give them the permission to share, give them the permission to make that available, and really start to use Yammer as a place where people can share their best. The organisations that do this well, to discover talent and potential, help their employees to see talent and capability as something that can be discovered through the network, that their careers can be enhanced by the work they do on Yammer. I saw one situation in a financial services organisation, a teller do such a good job of helping a senior leader in the organisation to understand the everyday customer situation, that bank teller was immediately promoted to be a head of business development for that senior leader. The leader was so impressed with that individual's talents and capabilities, they wanted them working in their business and working for their customers. That's the kind of opportunity that these networks bring, and obviously we've talked a lot about that opportunity to challenge your employees to bring their best, to make your organisation its best, and that the strategy of your organisation constantly evolves. Open up your organisation's conversation about strategy. One of the things you can even do is write your strategy in Yammer. You know, if you use something like the Lafley and Martin model that I put up earlier, you can actually post those questions in Yammer groups and invite employees to contribute directly to the development of strategy. Your board, your CEO, your strategy team will still have control and governance of the process. But what you'll be doing is leveraging talents and capabilities across your organization. You'll be leveraging the things your CEO and senior executives don't know. And that offers a significant potential for the organization to do things in a much, much more effective way, to much more effectively meet the needs of customers, and to grow and develop and to adapt. So there's some of the, you know, kind of key highlights that I think organizations should be exploring in this time, and making sure they've got a thriving Yammer network to do so. To kind of realize these benefits, you need to be doing these things. If your Yammer network is just mostly senior executives posting status, then you don't have the engagement, the contribution to do so. But inviting people to bring these things is going to bring your Yammer network to life. When people see the Yammer network as a place where they can contribute to work, can contribute to the success of the organization, we get that, you know, everyday value out of everyday work that I was talking about before in my adoption model. And that's where the value really starts to take off. So, you know, how do we create value in Yammer? Well, I've shared a post on my blog some time ago about the 4 key value drivers. And if you're talking to senior executives about why they should bother with Yammer in your organization, here are 4 themes to constantly hit on. Growth. You know, how can Yammer contribute to the growth of your organization? You know, can it improve customer and stakeholder benefits? Can it enable you to deliver sales and services more effectively? Can it expand other stakeholder benefits? So absolutely, the things I've seen is Yammer supporting sales and revenue growth, you know, and enabling people to get feedback from the front line on marketing campaigns in real time, innovation we spoke about before, and particularly this idea of capturing customer insights and feeding them back to the product and marketing teams that can leverage them. Effectiveness, you know, we've talked about this, using people's services and reducing waste, removing duplication, ensuring that projects are invested in the right activities at the right time, and fostering that kind of strategy and alignment to purpose. One of the key things your Yammer network can do is cut through the hierarchy. And cutting through the hierarchy is a fundamental thing in terms of accelerating the speed in your organization. If you've got policies, processes, or levels of management that are preventing decisions from being made that need to be made, then your organization is not adapting and responding to the market. Enabling employees to raise conversations around this topic, engage the leaders who are directly responsible for those areas, and start conversations about the need to make change is going to cut through a whole bunch of bureaucracy and surface a whole bunch of opportunity to do different and to do faster. And, you know, in a time of uncertainty, it's important to remember risk management. Things you don't know are some of the most dangerous things in organizations. What you don't know about your customers, what you don't know about your competitors, what you don't know about broken processes, what you don't know about compliance activities or practices in the front line. Many organizations are concerned about, you know, encouraging their employees to share, because what if they share a best practice which isn't compliant? Or what if they share a workaround that actually isn't the official process? And my answer is, they're sharing that around the water cooler. Don't you want to know? If you know about it, you have the opportunity to engage with those employees, to have a conversation, to fix that issue, or at least to make sure that they know the better ways of working that will be endorsed by you. And many times, organizations have been deeply concerned about workarounds, about differences in practices, only to discover that that difference in practice is perfectly compliant and in fact is a better way of working, and they want to pick that up, lift it, and share it across the organization. I encourage a lot of my clients to focus on things like continuous improvement activities, where you search for better ways of doing work and you rapidly scale them and share them across the organization. In things like the Toyota production system, or more generally, lean manufacturing or Kaizen, there are deep practices that can enable organizations to pick up practices that help make them more fit for their customers and share them widely. And Yammer plays a critical role in facilitating those kinds of conversations. So they're the key topics that I wanted to address today. But, you know, we've still got some time available, so I'm happy to take any questions. So what I might do then is stop sharing and kind of open up to the Q&A, and happy to address any questions that anyone have there. So the first question comes from Jeff, and he's asking about how freelancers can activate networks. Are there tools that realize the benefits of Yammer that you have presented here? Well, you know, Yammer obviously reflects some of the approaches and practices of public social networks. It isn't necessarily the same kind of experience, but it does represent those behaviors. I would certainly encourage any freelancers to work with their clients in this kind of open way. Being able to share your work in progress, being able to do that directly with clients or across open networks is a really powerful way to work. And if you are a freelancer, I always encourage you to ask your clients to give you access to their Yammer networks. It's a great opportunity to learn about the culture of the organization, and also to help you contribute to the delivery of the projects that you're delivering. The second question in Q&A comes from Nikki, and it's really around getting the C-suite level on board to the value of Yammer as a knowledge-based tool. You know, if they're wedded to email, if they've dismissed Yammer because of perhaps a previous launch that didn't get the kind of success they're talking about. So Nikki, I mean, one of the key things I always do is make sure that my conversation with the C-suite is framed the way I framed this talk today. So I make sure I dive into the issues that are top of their mind. I want to start talking to them about the strategy of the organization. Coming at them with Yammer and trying to sell them Yammer, because Yammer is approaching them a little bit like, you know, the old adage of, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If you sound like a tech consultant or a change specialist who's just desperate to push your tool, senior executives will begin skeptical. The key thing is understand the problems your senior leaders want solved and begin your conversations solving those problems. I have framed through this talk some of the key problems that organizations need to solve. They're problems like alignment of people with the strategy. They're like diversifying the inputs into strategy. It's the ability to understand customer needs, the understand and react quickly, the way to make processes more efficient. I've used those value drivers and those kinds of insights into the common problems Yammer solves to be able to demonstrate to many organizations that we can really quickly solve those key needs, and that that investing time and effort in doing so is really valuable to them, and that in fact they've got no other way of solving those kinds of issues. So one of the key things I'm kind of focused on doing in that situation is defining one of those priority areas that they want to see some value created and running some tests in that area. So defining up a short, sharp pilot, some groups and audiences to be involved and engaged, and really starting to think about how I can demonstrate some value quickly for those people. They may be still deeply involved and invested in Yammer, in email, sorry, or other tools. To be honest, a lot of the work I've talked about here doesn't necessarily involve chief executives spending all day in Yammer. A lot of the work we're talking about is more about middle level managers finding the time and engagement, and they will quickly see the benefits if it's helping them do what they need to do. And I think that's where we've often kind of lost out in Yammer adoption, is we've kind of gone straight to the CEO, supported by employee communications, and we've said, hey, do a whole bunch of Yammer town halls, Q&As, maybe do some live events. You know, that'll get us the adoption we want. And absolutely, that gets employees in, listening to the CEO and contributing. But unless you've got that sense that work comes into this environment as well, that this can contribute to the communities that are developing across the organization, unless you get that buy-in, then what happens is the CEO's engaged, mid-level managers don't understand why, the process conversation that we've been talking about, the product conversation we've been talking about doesn't start to happen, and ultimately we lose a lot of value in that process. So that's really some of those key questions and issues there. Look, are there any further questions at this stage? It looks like we've addressed those key questions at this point. I finished a little ahead of time, which is always a good thing. But I'm happy to take any further questions, or perhaps give it a few minutes. But otherwise, we might. There seems to be some activity.
Hey, Simon. Yeah,
Sure.
there is not any. There's no more questions there. But however, I just wanted to share a story relevant to what you presented there. Is it all right?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I've some months ago, I've actually worked for a print management organization. So it is fairly a large organization, and what they do every year is they actually, they print out calendars for their partners and for the dealers and customers and stuff like that, right? And previous years they used to engage, professional photographers and have to go and engage and have to schedule shoots and things like that. But what happened in the last few months is there is actually a photography enthusiasts community in Yammer, and there's few people who are constantly posting really good landscape photographs taken from their cameras on the way to the commute. For example, one guy particularly in Sydney, he was posting a lot of pictures of his commute and things like that. Then it sparked the interest among the communications team. And what they've done is they've actually, instead of hiring a professional photographer, instead they've actually said they've conducted a competition among employees to actually post their pictures so that they could actually select 12 of those best pictures and actually share them with their customers and dealers through their yearly calendars. So that's the power of Yammer is instead of what they were doing previously, engaging, paying for photography for outside, now they've engaged their own employees to do that and support that community and so on. So
yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example, Jag, and that's exactly what we're talking about here today. Talents and capabilities of the employees being able to be something that can be leveraged more generally and taken forward. And I've seen that in other clients too, particularly in situations where they had a vibrant photography group and they had emergency photography needs. So an event that hadn't been scheduled to have a photographer, and they just invited an employee who had their camera to come down and contribute. I've seen situations where perhaps there were client events, and an organisation's put out a call on Yammer to say, would anyone like to kind of come down and help with a booth or help and make a contribution to that client event in some specific way, leveraging their skills and capabilities. And people have rushed to contribute. They've rushed to come to learning events when there was, spare seats available at the last minute because people had cancelled. So a number of opportunities that people can do to really share and contribute to the way their organisation's adapting. And I think that also highlights nicely, Jag, the thing that the communities you create don't have to be work process communities. They don't have to be capability areas. They don't have to be business units. Sometimes those social communities, things like water coolers, things like photography groups, pet groups, so they can make a useful contribution to connecting up your organisation, to fostering more conversations, and ultimately to being able to develop the network and grow the value of that network for your organisation in ways that you can't expect when you started out with that photography group.
Absolutely, yeah. There's one other example also is along with the photography, right? There was also a group for young families and parents with new kids and new babies and stuff, right? So it's nothing to do with work at all. But there was a community where people from different cities in Australia were able to join in and share their experiences, their questions and things like that. So each of those parent groups are able to help each other out, and that tied back with parental leave policies and secondary care policies and things like that in the company as well. So people who are not aware of such policies before are participating in that group, going back to HR and speaking with them and getting more leave added to their schedule and stuff like that. So yeah, that's just another example of the power of Yammer communities, I think.
Yeah, I've seen it with families. I've seen it with pride groups, where those communities actually take on the responsibility to improve the policy and to improve the way it communicates, the way it's effective in that organisation. Very, very powerful. Well, what I will do is I will share my presentation back again, just so that we can thank our sponsors, because they're an important part of bringing M365 May to market. Sorry, let me just see if I can move through. So thank you to all the sponsors who've enabled this really exciting event to happen over this month. I think we all want to thank the sponsors for their contributions, and particularly thank all the producers and organisers of this event. This event hasn't happened without a whole bunch of work, and I know this is Jag's last production, so thank you to Jag for seeing me through seamlessly. It's been a great experience and a great demonstration of the power of Microsoft Teams as well. So thank you all very much.